Hello, Nicole.
Hi, Jess.
We've tried to start this podcast at least 10 times. It's a Friday afternoon right before applications open for SCO5. So it's been a heck of a week, but we wanted to come together and talk a little bit about C Club's fifth cohort because when this podcast drops, applications will have been open for a couple days. We'll be right in the midst of probably the most fun time at C Club, but also some of the crazier times at C Club. So my hope here is that we can dive into definitely, what people should expect from C Club's fifth cohort. Obviously, there's opportunities for people to participate in the selection and feedback through this process. And we have some experiments that we're running there that I'd love to share a little bit more about. And I thought maybe it'd be useful for us just to zoom out a little bit because there's so much context and iteration and building that we've done since the very first cohort, and especially over the last few months, based on our experience in the third and fourth cohorts, that I think maybe inform and will provide useful context to folks who are maybe both following the C Club network building journey along with potentially applying or participating in SCO5. Sound good?
So good.
We'll see if we can get through it because, as I said, it's Friday after a long week. But I'm pumped, and I know you're pumped because you've been working very hard for the last couple of months with the Accelerator team and the broader C Club team to sort of shape up and position and get ready to rock and roll, which is the funnest part of my year is when we get to go dive in with a whole new batch of really creative, talented human beings and get our hands dirty. I feel like we're ready to get our hands dirty again.
Yeah, it's been a long many months without projects in our day-to-day. We've been still talking to many projects. I think we've spoken to over 150 projects. Myrna, who's in many ways the engine behind the accelerator right now, she's got the exact tally, but we've spoken to many projects in the last few months, but not on the regular way that we do in the accelerator. So we're ready. We are so ready for you all.
Maybe let's start at the meta here, which is what are we actually trying to achieve here? Why do we think the accelerator is just, I think over the last year or so, we've really run a lot of experiments and we keep coming back to this sort of format, this cohorts of really talented people coming together over a relatively short period of time, trying to make really big progress. I think there's a world where maybe we tried that out a few different cohorts or accelerator attempts and sort of maybe iterated away from it. And yet I think we sort of found ourselves more and more and more convinced that this is just by far the best way to support projects from the earliest stages to their early growth stages in the Web3 space. So why does the accelerator matter?
Sure. I'm going to zoom out even a tiny bit more into sort of where the accelerator lives in the network of Seed Club. And so we bring together these great people and great projects. And as you know, I wrote up a little something for our internal team on the network and my thoughts on it and sort of how I see it. And along with it being great people and great projects, it's also we need to bring in the ones that are right for us and that align with how we see this ecosystem that we're building. And so much of that is bringing those folks together and then working intensively to answer these questions that are coming up in real time. There's a lot that can be done async. There's a lot that can be done on project's own or via one-on-one meetings. But what we're seeing is that when these projects come together, there's this combination where the sum is much greater than the individual parts. And on top of that, while the space continues to move forward at a rapid pace, there's still questions that are coming up that we need to problem solve in real time. And so we know that projects are going to ask us questions that we haven't considered yet. But again, this network that we have in which the accelerator lives, it guarantees that when those questions arise, it's not up to you or up to me to answer it on our own, but for us to put it out to our network. So our collaborators and our contributors and our strategic contributors and all of these various people in the network. And so coming together in real time and tackling these questions head on is so key. There's a lot of other pieces of what we do, and we'll get into that happen synchronously that are also incredibly important. But I think that's the key.
Yeah, let's go back to some of the original insights. Actually, I discovered one of the first documents that we created even before your time here at C Club, Nicole, around I think it was actually August 2020. What is C Club? And it's cool to see how far we've come and also yet how clear the original insight there was, which is that, yes, the space changes rapidly. There's so obviously something here at the intersections of community and social tokens and this sort of social capital. And and tokens. And, it was very clear that we saw communities as networks and this deep belief that tokens represent ownership and incentive alignment in networks, but that there was so many questions, and most of those questions were big and unopened. And I think as we've continued to sort of build in this space, some of those questions get answered, but of course they uncover more and more questions. And so in this like landscape where there, certainty is so fleeting, and space is innovating and changing so much, having this network of human beings, I like to refer to them as the sense-making network, who are out there, exploring at their own edges and then coming back to sort of share their insight and update their learning in this community or network environment, I think to me was like the only realistic way of us being able to get to meaningful answers in a fast enough way to actually have increase the chances of success for projects that are very often doing new, interesting, weird things that many people don't even quite understand until they're done. And so I think, what I love about the cohort model is it just creates such a focal point for that type of work to be done, where if we go out through a few times a year, put a call out for projects, work with our token holders and members to help choose the best projects, and then we smash them together for a period of time, and then they go out and they start building. And then we have this feedback loop where those people who are building and learning the most are coming back and supporting the next wave of projects, and of course, supporting other members in their cohort as well. So now we're stepping into our 5th cohort. We've had 4 batches, 65 projects, hundreds of people who are leading those projects, learning at the edges faster than folks who are maybe just sitting and watching. And those people get to be brought together with our new batch. And I don't think it's a big stretch for people's imagination to see how or why that would be super valuable.
Yeah. I mean, I think that looking at a recent learning or change that we made, when I came in, we had something called our studio, and that was where we were able to work really intensively with one project. And those were projects that maybe didn't need to be involved in sort of the day-to-day programming and take part in some of the more scheduled, consistent, and required elements of the accelerator. I think that the piece that we saw and sort of what's led to some of the ways that we've shifted the relationship with those projects now is that that's great that they don't necessarily need to participate in that same way, or they need a different type of support. But the piece that they don't want to lose out on, and we don't want them to lose out on, is being within that network. And so even in sort of how we're rethinking that, I think that it was a learning for us over the last 3 months or so of like, oh, wow, working sort of discreetly with individual studio projects is a disservice to them. It's a disservice to the network. Putting them in there just creates more lines and more positive tension between all of these points. And that's really what we want, is this positive tension.
Yeah, I think that was a big learning. And it's very easy for me now to say to somebody, listen, it's very worthwhile to wait the month or 2 until we can get you into this accelerator cohort, rather than feeling the need that we might miss out on working with a great project, or that maybe they would sort of slow down without being put into some sort of immediate support. And I think we found this good middle ground where we have a good support network for teams that are interested in applying for the accelerator. Myrna has done a great job at connecting dots there and making sure that we're able to help provide some early momentum to teams. And I think we have a lot planned in that direction as well. But that, there's just no doubt in my mind that the biggest impact we can have with teams is if we bring a curated group of smart people together in a very focused way to a specific end. I'm very, very stoked to see that renewed focus play out in SCO5.
Can't believe it's happening in just a few days.
I know. Before we get into, I want to definitely dive into sort of how we've made some fairly significant changes to the programming and sort of structure of the accelerator. And we definitely want to talk about which types of projects should apply and what to expect from the application process, because we've made some big changes there as well. But I wonder maybe just a few minutes of reflection on like, what are some of the big lessons that we learned over the past few months? So definitely the studio wasn't providing the same bang for the buck that we get from the accelerator. I think that's a big lesson. Any other ones come to mind?
Yeah, I think, we've spent a lot of time thinking about how we address this information asymmetry that happens within the people that are having the most exposure to the project and to the applicants and the builders. So the more time that you spend, it's this sort of self-fulfilling cycle where the more time that you spend talking to builders, the better you get at understanding the challenges and indicators of success. And the more that you understand that, the better you are at it. And that ends up being a really small group of people. And yet the most, valuable part of Seed Club is that we are this network and we are a community, and that it extends even beyond our alumni and the current cohort and our collaborators and our contributors, but to all of our club holders. And so I think that that has been a big question that we've been thinking about for the last 3+ months is we have this group of people that have signaled that they believe in Seed Club and that they want to be a part of this thing that we're building. They're curious, or they like just having a seat at the table and learning through observing or lurking. There's all of these different people that show up in different ways. And how can we do our best job to include and deploy them in thoughtful ways and in ways that let them get sort of closer into that spiral? And each time, everybody sort of moves a little bit further into the spiral. That has been a big part of our conversation over the last month.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting challenge in that for many early stage projects, it's not sort of volume of advice that is the most valuable. Much of the things that are grappling with are things that they probably don't want to be public, or at least there's still a lot of figuring out and discovery being done there. And I think there's this risk of putting things out into the world and it sort of being seen as gospel or truth or a promise or all sorts of things that if you're in the earliest stages, you really want to make sure you have the freedom to sort of explore. And so, one of the questions we get often is like, well, do we record sessions? And the answer is always no, we do not record sessions. These are places for people to come together. And a big part of that is sort of this bubble of trust where we can actually have that freedom to explore. But it does cause this big challenge in that we have an incredible, talented network of folks, there's just too many to be able to effectively bring in the very intimate way that we design the accelerator cohorts. And so I am very excited about sort of the new layers that we're able to create here to make it easier for other people to come in an effective way, to at least be up to date on what projects are doing, to sort of get exposure to some of the latest insights, and then to hopefully provide ways that they can be helpful to projects, even if that isn't in sort of the more intimate, deep collaboration is absolutely core to the accelerator. Like, we bring great projects along with our great collaborator network, work very closely in small groups together over the period of the accelerator. And that group of collaborators is a small subset of our overall community. And we are very thoughtful about how those are chosen and making sure that we're matching people that have relevant talent to the types of projects that we're backing with. And I think this is such an interesting challenge in that there's very obvious value to tapping into the wider network. And also we hold the builders in the Seed Club network as the core audience that we serve. And collaborators are the folks that we do our best to make sure that they can be in a place to support those builders. And then our wider community becomes hopefully the support network, but they're not the focus of the design of this accelerator. And I think it's important that we note that and that we're really doing our best to try to expand that, but that we won't expand that to the detriment of the experience that we're delivering to builders.
Yeah, and I think, if you sort of look at the accelerator or you look at sort of these two bookends of the accelerator, there's the intake and then there's sort of the final demo day, or perhaps mint day, as some may call it for this cohort. I think that those are the two places where our community really comes, the sort of like outer ring of the community really gets to come and participate and show up and celebrate. And I think that the demo day, I always want to do better, but I think that we've done a pretty crackerjack job of nailing that so far. And I think that as far as the selection and where the community comes in there, I think that we thought that we could maybe tweak that a little bit. And so some of that people are going to see starting on August 1st. And we're pretty excited with this first experiment we're running.
Yeah, I think the last lesson I see is that, like, how are we partnering with our community to choose the best projects? Because I think one of the exciting things about C Club is that unlike Web2 accelerators where you kind of need to be in a special club, anybody can come in. If you hold 10 club tokens, you get to be involved in the discussions and decision making around helping us filter which projects get into SEO5, and then of course have sort of a reason and an ability to support them as they come out of the demo day. Our previous cohort, I think we used the right race, so that we actually turned over a voting on the top 10 projects over purely to our token holders. So if you held club tokens, there was a right race style form. It feels like decades ago now. I don't know if we've even seen a right race in the wild. I don't even think you can do it anymore, but it allowed token holders to sort of to vote. And I think it was a wonderful experiment, and we got a wonderful group of projects that came out of that. But for a number of reasons, that's just not really sufficient moving forward. I think one reason is I think we see this sort of how we do collective decision making as like a place where we want to not just iterate, but do new discrete experiments, because we think there's so much design space there. But also we ran into a challenge where I think you had mentioned it earlier. There's just such a vast information asymmetry between, what was a very thin amount of information provided on the right race, given the UX of that tool, and the depths of these big adventures that founders and builders were taking their communities on. To me, those are like the two big pieces here. There's a ton of information asymmetry. We really want to ensure that our community has their hands as deep into the selection processes as we can. Do you want to maybe sort of highlight how we've made that shift? We'll get into what projects should
Yeah.
expect and who should apply, but I think for the most people listening to this, the call to action is probably August 1st. You will begin to have the power to help us discuss, choose, boost projects that are applying and be deeply involved in the decision process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So as you mentioned, the UX of the right race, that has been, a super fun tool that a lot of folks have used within Mirror, and we enjoyed and played around with for 2 cohorts. And also we saw that even the information that we were able to reveal about projects, we had so much more behind the scenes, whether it was an application video, and all of these additional responses to the various questions that we ask. And I think that the other piece of that is the types of criteria and things that are important to us, and the things that we know that if you demonstrate X or you demonstrate Y, that's going to make you be a good fit for Seed Club, and that's going to probably lead to a more successful project. And those just weren't pieces of information that we could reveal well in any tools that existed. It brought us to this pretty fun challenge, which was that we needed to build something ourselves. And so massive shout out to the product team. If you haven't already checked it out, you definitely should click through and check out the selection tool. I'm going to say the URL.
Accelerator.seedclub.xyz.
Accelerator.seedclub.
Poke around it today. It is live.
Yeah, it's super exciting, super bright and sunny. And what you're going to see there is almost all of the information about projects. The only things that we kept hidden was obviously personal information that helps us identify projects and helps us do the appropriate diligence, but that not the general public or even club holding public needs to see. You get to see the video that tells a little bit about the project. You see their call to adventure. You learn a little bit about the team and their various profiles. And so, I'm an educator. And what I love in products and in tools is when there's an educational aspect. And I think that you're going to see that in the selection tool, is that we're sharing this information, but we're also saying these are the things that are important to us.
And there's 2 core actions, I think, that are new with this tool. The first being that if you're a club token holder, you'll be able to go in and help signal for great projects. And so there's this feature that I think we're calling Boost, which means that if you see a project that you like, you can signal that you think this should be near the top of the list by clicking Boost. And then we're hoping that our club holders will be able to go in and give sort of essentially a thumbs up to great projects, which helps us sort of filter out what we expect to be, many, many applications, which I think will be super useful and interesting to see how that gets used. The feature I'm most excited about is the inline comments. So we've added a comment section to these applications. And, if we think about the population who'll be able to join us in participating in boosting and commenting, that is our club holders, which means they're members of Seed Club. So it's not just anybody, though anybody could theoretically be a club token holder. It does sort of shorten down the audience a little bit. And so I'm excited to see how our community uses comments to help pull up more detail about projects, to add feedback to projects, to sort of tease out more of the valuable information and potentially even give a lot of feedback that would be helpful to projects, whether they're chosen in Seed Club or not.
Not only that, but projects can respond. And so I think that open discourse is, again, the superpower that we have and that we're really leaning into, which is that, listen, we are in community with each other. This is a conversation. And the same way that we've been having those conversations via Zoom for the last few months, where somebody tells me about their project and I ask them questions, or I give feedback, or I say, I hadn't thought of that way, or that feels a little bit Web 2.5. And this is sort of how we're framing something. And these are all conversations that previously have been behind closed digital doors and just one-on-one. And so we're bringing that conversation out into the, open Seed Club community square. Again, I think that's when I talk about that this is an education on top of a selection tool. We are all sort of educating each other on what we think is important and how we think about projects and the things that we wonder. And then projects get to receive that feedback in real time. I'll also say this is coming out on Thursday, so that'll be August 4th. That open discourse can happen with projects, for example, through August 15th. So you can submit your project on say August 3rd. People can comment and have questions, and you can edit through August 15th. At August 15th, you have to shut it down, but then you can continue to respond to questions until we shut down comments on the 22nd. I'm just really excited about that open discourse and that people are going to literally be in conversation with each other.
Yeah, it should be cool to see. So our broader community is going to help us filter projects or at least signal what they believe to be the most interesting projects. And there's some interesting things we can do on the back end of sort of seeing relevant data that will inform how we can pull out a shorter list of projects, because that's kind of the big challenge is, Seed Club is always about bringing a small number of teams together. We're not trying to be a factory of tokens and launch dozens upon dozens or hundreds of projects. We have a really tough process and decision process where we need to get down to 20 or so projects that will be accepted into the next batch. And that's a difficult thing to do generally. And I think it can be a more difficult thing to do when we're trying to, involve the community much more. So beyond the boost process and through August 15th, maybe take us through how the rest of the application or decision-making process, maybe more specifically, will work.
Sure thing. So yesterday, we just put out a post that goes into this in more detail. So I highly recommend folks going over to Seed Club's Mirror publication page and checking out the editorial that talks about this. But here's, I think, some of the key pieces. So if you were a very loyal Seed Club community follower back in January, you might have noticed that tomatoes started appearing in some of our bios and in some of our comments, and that there was just tomatoes sort of sprinkled around the Twitterverse for people that were sort of diehard Seed Clubbers. And what this was kind of this emergent organic group that self-identified. So we knew that we had to score projects. Jess, you and I are very good at underestimating the amount of projects that we're going to get. So we had over 200 projects that we need to select, and that was conceivably about 10% of the projects we're going to get in. And so we deployed collaborators and alumni and folks that had come in through the Dow 20, all of these people that knew Seed Club well and had been somehow involved in the accelerator previously. And they came in, and using a rubric and a really structured process, they scored each about 5 projects. And we put all of those scores together, and it helped us do this sort of, as you mentioned, this massive narrowing and do it thoughtfully. Each project got scored at least twice and looked at from a bunch of different perspectives. What was really cool was that we had put all of these reviewers together in a Telegram chat, really just for ease of coordination, for me to just be able to share information. But what you'll see in the editorial is that once everybody was in there, all of a sudden they felt this sense of community themselves. And out of that was born this tomato concept. And, we talked about at the top this sensemaking network. This was sort of one fractal of the sensemaking network that we have within Seed Club. It was people that knew who we were. It was people that had been somehow connected with the accelerator. It was people that had experience building and knew what indicators of success and what some of the key things were to look at. And so what you're going to see in this next cycle is that after we turn the applications over for boosting and commenting, then this group of people, this tomato, is going to come back together and do a second round of review for those projects that have been curated to the top from the comments and boosts by our general club holding public. And little by little, we are going to curate smaller and smaller groups or cohorts until we're left with the projects that are the best fit, probably somewhere between 10 and 20.
Yeah, I love the emergence of tomatoes. I've updated my Twitter profile to include the tomato tag already because I got super excited about it. And
you inspired me. Thank you.
Well, I figured that I had to beat you to it because I knew it was coming eventually, and it just seemed you're too busy to do it. So I wanted to take the lead here. That group's very dynamic. And so there's a smaller group. What it allows us to do is really have really broad yet deep discussions on projects. We can reduce some of the bias that exists in any one individual. And even out of our last time running this, there was sort of a ton of interesting insights and different ways to look at projects that inform the ultimate decision. And I expect more of that. And so we're growing that group a little bit, and invitations for that have gone out already. And so I'm excited to see how that comes together. There's still a last piece of this as well, which is we take the brand and the trust that we're building at Seed Club very seriously. And so a final subset of projects will be broken down into, and there'll be direct interviews done there that will allow us to get to know the builders more and to really do sort of like another pass, which is another huge lift. There's just so many pieces that go into this decision process. Mm-hmm. Hopefully not so many that we miss great projects, that we're able to kind of get down into what we think will be some of the most aligned projects with Seed Club. And then from there, we do a whole other check, which is, I think, super important and something that I know you've taken the lead on. And we have an increasingly robust process of the final due diligence, which is really wanting to make sure that these projects are values aligned with C Club, that the builders are of high integrity and hold high ethics, and that they'll be good members of the C Club community. I think so much about just this curation that we do is being so key. And it feels in many ways, or at least this is a thing that I kind of go back and forth in my mind quite a bit, that so much of Web3 is empowered by this sort of permissionlessness and openness. And I think that's such an incredible piece of the tools and the infrastructure that we have to go build on. And yet, for C Club to be super successful, we believe that curation and trust are just absolutely essential. And so there are many, many, many layers here that we try to layer on top of, because we think that there's, the biggest existential risk, I think, to C Club is that we are involved in and start to support projects that inadvertently don't follow the community guidelines or the values that are so key here. And, I just think about the amount of effort that we put into this decision process. It's not something we take lightly whatsoever. There's part of it wanting to make sure we don't miss any great projects. We want to make sure that we're not bringing bias as best we can to the process. And then also wanting to make sure that we do everything we possibly can to ensure that the people coming into this community, this incredible group of human beings that already exist in C Club, match the standards and approach the world that fit the C Club values.
Yeah, as the cycle goes on, it truly becomes sort of brain melting, because there are so many different perspectives that we're looking at these projects through, and then the builders. But again, one of the things I'm so encouraged by is that each of the groups that are doing the various stages are growing, and they're larger, and they have a better tool set to do that. And so what we're seeing is that, we didn't even have reviewing and boosting last time. So that's a major win. And then on top of that, there's going to be more people that are able to help us score projects, and we've been thoughtful about that. There's more people that are going to be able to interview projects, and there's going to be more people even at that final stage where just really having those hard conversations and thinking about, okay, is this project really a good fit? Can we actually provide value? Are they really aligned with our understanding of this ecosystem that we're building? And so while we're not exploding the entire process, we are bringing more people thoughtfully in, and that feels really good to me.
I love both like the progress we get to make in designing this and the thoughtfulness, and then also just our willingness to experiment. I think, like I've shared in the past, where my hope is we don't just make iterative improvements to these things, but that we do take advantage of sort of the newness of the space and where we are as an organization to continue to experiment with finding the best balance between this high touch, deep information gathering that we can do in smaller groups, and then also involving our broader community in the selection process without opening it up to easy ways to be gamed and to sort of negatively impact the goals that we're trying to drive to. So it's no easy task. And I think we believe so deeply in human beings being the layer zero of Web3. And I think we're very much acting on it in the way that this process is designed.
Hell yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, maybe it's a good time as we talk for 30 minutes about our selection process. We have made some fairly big changes to the Accelerator. We took almost 2 whole quarters off from running the Accelerator to do some heavy lifting, the foundation building, and ensuring that C Club as an organization was in a strong position, that we had the time to sort of incorporate all of our learnings from the last 4 cohorts and design a structure here for the 5th cohort that was going to lead to the most success for our projects. What does this new shape of the Accelerator look like? What are the biggest differences now? And maybe you can share some of the intentions behind them.
Yeah, sure thing. I think that so much of the design process is this iteration. It is this pendulum. And coming out of SEO 2 and 03, there was some really cool emergent experiments that came from the Accelerator builders themselves that we sort of concretized within SEO 4. And I think that there was a lot that was great about that. And it also meant that there was more programming than we'd ever had. There was more scheduled synchronous programs and sessions than we'd ever had before. I mean, the truth of the matter is when you're building something in Web3, you can have perhaps infinite workshops and sessions because we all have infinite questions, but you should not have infinite sessions. And you really need to, the same way that we're curating projects, you really need to curate the amount of time that people are with you, because what they really need to be doing is going out and applying those learnings in their community. And so that is one of the big takeaways that we're bringing in. And I think that the pendulum is swinging a little bit back the other direction, where we're looking at what is the minimum viable dosage or time together, and then how do we use that really thoughtfully. And so we have pared down the synchronous time somewhat. There's opportunities still to connect socially. There's still time for people to connect with their collaborators and the wayfinders that are guiding them. And there are still very much educational sessions. When you look at those educational sessions, there's another change there. I think that in the first few cycles of the cohort, we were all just trying to get on the same mindset and have a shared understanding of what even is this Web3 thing and what does it mean to have a token and how to think about this. Fortunately, because of things like Mirror and the proliferation of podcasts and Discords, people have generally leveled up and people are coming in with a stronger understanding of some of these fundamentals. So what that looks like as it regards to the structure of the accelerator, on top of these mindset shift sessions or sort of fireside chats, people also really want to dig into the tactical questions and say, okay, when you are actually putting together a deck or putting together a Notion page that's going to tell the story as you think about a crowdfund or a fundraise, what should you be doing? Or exploring different legal structures. These are all pieces that, while we're not going to tell anybody what the right legal structure is, we do have some ways to really lay out these concrete pieces of information. And we find that builders are really hungry for that, to dig into specifics and to dig into some of the tactical questions they have. And so these sessions that we're going to have are going to be a balance of fireside chats that get into the mindset and help you understand what it means to build in Web3, but then also these tactical questions. Looking at this minimum viable structure, the other piece that we realized is that having the opportunity to go and apply the learnings with almost no programming for a few weeks is an exciting experiment that we're going to run. So we've actually extended the accelerator from 8 to 12 weeks. But within that, we have what we're calling interval training. So we're going to start out with about 6 weeks of programming and then take a few week break where projects go and they apply the learnings in their communities and they build and they're with their communities, which is actually one of the most valuable things they can do. And then they're going to come back with a whole other level of questions. And I think I hinted at this earlier. The other side of this is that at the end of these 12 weeks, that's approximately when most projects end up being ready to launch some type of NFT. And so our demo day is going to also be a mint day for many projects. And not every project is going to be ready to mint. Not every project should mint their first NFT. But for those that are ready to put out a first iteration of a token, they will have the opportunity. For other projects that are ready to share a milestone, they will have the opportunity. And so our hope is that this new revamped 12-week schedule, where there's, again, some of the really important information in the right dosage, and then with time to build and apply and learn and have deeper questions, is going to lead to successful project launch and the right balance of learning and building.
What I'm really excited about is, I think these fireside chats or time where we bring in really experienced builders who get to share the most recent insights, knowledge, information from their lived experience is just so helpful in helping people think big and expanding what's possible and starting to connect dots that way. But then in these very tactical, more workshop focused sessions, we get to go deep and specific and provide frameworks, which is a thing that we're really excited about. I think we have much stronger opinions on how certain things can be done, or at least we've been able to narrow the design space down fairly significantly. So we get to dive into those and make them very applicable to those projects. But then throughout this entire process, we group teams up into sort of relevant, aligned, small groups that get paired up with our collaborators, our wayfinders. And so throughout the process, whether they're in the first 6 weeks or moving into more of the build phase, there will always be this sort of regular collaboration space where teams won't go for longer than a few days without having a place where they can come back together and re-engage and answer any questions that might be roadblocking them, tap into other resources that exist within the C Club network. There's sort of this, I think go big, lay the foundation, get back out into the world and start building, advance the key points that we know are really essential to getting to launch ready, and then come back together and sort of reassess and ensure that teams are in the best place to go public with whatever that is. As you said, I think we're really excited about the possibility of more projects launching their community token, be that an NFT or launching just their Hello World post, or coming out at demo day Mint Day, whatever we end up calling it. There's still a debate going on around that. Just with it's just such an opportunity we bring so much attention, such high vibes. It's such a great time to be able to capture the early insight of the broader Web3 space, that making sure that projects are in a place to do that is key. I think what we saw last few cohorts is there's just so much sense making, figuring out that teams are really almost waiting to ingest it all, see the fullness of the programming before they stepped out and started to build. And we think that the best learning is doing. And so I'm pretty excited about this new structure. It's an experiment. Maybe it's something we continue, maybe it's something we don't. But I think based on our lessons learned so far, that I'm pretty optimistic that it will be super impactful for builders this time.
Yeah, and to that point, there's this other piece that you mentioned as far as the squads and the collaborators. And one of the words that I remember even as I came in as a participant in SEO2 was over-delivering. And it's something that I've held really central as I stepped into working on this side of the accelerator. And it's something that we still carry forward into every cohort. But I think that how we think about over-delivering and what that looks like has shifted a little bit. And there was, I think, a big learning in that we were so focused on how much information can we provide to these projects, as well as surrounding them with all of the specialists and experienced veterans in the space, that it was too much information in too many different types of ways. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about is that the collaborators that we're bringing in, and again, these are folks that have a few cycles of building in some part of Web3 or beyond, and have advice and guidance to give, whether generally from sort of just the builder's journey or topically on a specific element. These are people that are really excited to support projects. And also, often projects are not ready to be supported by them until they've gone out and applied some of that learning. And so, I'm sort of likening it to a siphon. Once you start the flow of a siphon in one direction, then it continues to flow. And so what we're doing is setting projects up so that they can draw information from the collaborators at the pace and at the right times and in the right ways, and knowing how to get that information. And we have so many collaborators lining up that are excited and ready to support. I'm really glad to set the projects up so that they can use those people and that time really well, and not feel pressured right at the beginning when they're just trying to figure out, is an NFT right for me? And should I be minting? And gosh, should I even be thinking about setting up a legal structure? These are all such heady topics and overwhelming topics. And so we're going to let them sort of take pieces, I think, a little bit more at a time. And that's, I think, one of the big changes that you'll see, is that there is sort of this one or two things at a time pace within this SEO5.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's more of a choose your own adventure piece here that I think is important, in that we have some level setting and early programming, but we are privileged in that we get to work with so many different types of organizations, builders with different visions. We get to take a very wide purview on what is a good fit for C Club, which can also lead to a bunch of challenges, right? How do we program for people that are building DAO tools versus folks who are building more of a community or social club, and being able to create the space for those teams to pull on the talent and insight as they need them, I think is going to help us be far more impactful in solving the meaningful problems or questions that are open for these folks. So we'll see how it goes. As I said, I'm pretty optimistic about it. And the thing that gives me just the utmost conviction is you start to look at the people who are leaning in and supporting these projects as collaborators at C Club. And, they're just so incredible that I have no doubt in the value that we're going to be able to provide here.
Yeah, every cycle, I just feel so honored and so privileged to be in the company of all of these people that are embarking on this adventure and taking this risky and interesting step into the unknown with us. So it is very exciting to think about those doors open on Monday, and we're stepping into it again.
Giddy up. Yeah, I think that's the gist of it. I mean, the application of this is going to be really interesting to see. And for folks listening, we're going to really see how well the structure works when it comes to the next demo day that will be towards the end of the fourth quarter of 2022, maybe into the first of 2023, depending on how things go. But yeah, there's this interesting tension as well that I think as we wanted to design spaces that sort of help lead to certain outcomes, when also are so aware of how many different paths there are to take in the space. And I think one of the things that's a really smart early decision is that we are not in the business of pressuring or pushing teams to launch tokens. And for many teams, it might be detrimental to come out of C Club and launch a token right away. Like there's just more work to be done in building the connections and the value or the tool, whatever they may be focused on building. And so we'll never sort of measure the success of a cohort on how fast people launch tokens. I think we are seeing enough consistency or in the types of potential paths here that I think we're going to be able to remove a lot of like the unnecessary or like the challenging cycles of trying to figure out what's right by narrowing that design space down slightly for those projects that see that those pathways forward as being relevant to them. At the same time, I'm probably most excited by the random projects that are doing their own random thing that are going to, get out there into the world and help us discover brand new ways of doing things. And so I want to hold both more structure and trying to drive towards more clear outcomes along with this openness and the value of leaning into the fact that we're at the beginning of the idea maze, both in C Club and in Web3, and definitely within all of these projects explorations in the space. Maybe we'll have to do a podcast following demo day to do a bit of a retro on how well this new model worked and what we've learned, because I'm sure there'll be a ton of lessons there.
Yeah, 1,000%. We don't know the things that we don't know are going to surprise us. And so the surprising ways that you all go about and use the portal and the surprising things that happen through the accelerator. I'm realizing, Jess, that there's kind of this like meta level of discourse that for some reason, didn't even occur to me until now, which is that I'm personally hoping that as community members are in the selection portal and they're going through and looking at projects and commenting and using this tool for the first time, my hope is that we see people jumping into our Discord and almost having sort of a meta conversation about the process. And I think that is actually, again, sort of one of these superpowers of this community that we're in, which is that that's an open door. We hope that people are going to tell us what they think and ask questions and make suggestions for next time and notice things. So not only will we do a retro in December or January, but we're going to be doing retros in real time in community. And I can't wait.
Building a DAO is a never-ending retro. It's interesting because, I always say that I look at the network that we're building at C Club as one of the products, if not the main product that we're building, even though the accelerator in many ways is our core product. Yeah. And that sort of focus on both like the immediate value drivers that create value for our projects and for C Club itself, and then also thinking about how we continue to build the meta structures that support that. Well, I think that's the hard work that we have to do as builders and as stewards of C Club.
Yeah, that's the positive tension.
Positive tension. I was going to let you go with your unknown unknowns, but I think you just quoted Donald Rumsfeld, which I just want to make sure I get on record. So the look on your face right now.
I know. I mean...
All right, we're going to do a quick pivot so as to not rest on that.
If comment. I could just melt into the bushes.
Yeah. By Homer Simpson. So I think we get a number of questions that come up, I think, through our early conversations with teams and just, on Twitter and our Discord of like, what are we looking for? What is the right type of project to join C Club? We've kind of given some hints here early. I think we have a fairly wide view of the types of projects that can and builders that we are looking to attract and are excited to work with. But how do you answer that question? Like, what is C Club looking for? What's a good SCO5 candidate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is one of the pieces where there's a mixture of the same elements that you see present in a lot of other incubators and accelerators. And so we're looking at the leadership team. Specifically, does this team have experience or proof of being able to deliver? Are they well matched, or is there some sort of gel there where they're complementing each other and they can work well together? Are they committed to the project? Is this something that they're going to be working on? And is there sort of sufficient skills to drive this forward? And so the team is a massive part of what we look at and part of evaluating the project, because you can have the best idea, but if you don't have the right folks to execute it, unfortunately may not go far. Then we do look at the project or the concept itself. So there's a couple pieces there. First of all, does this feel like a novel, innovative, good idea? Does this feel like something that should be brought into the world? There's obviously a certain amount of subjectivity to that. Is this something that seems like it could work? Is it a moonshot, but maybe it's the right people for that moonshot? And is there, again, some element of novelty so that it's not just a copycat of something that we've seen before? So that's looked through a couple of different ways, both just as the concept itself. Is there some understanding of a future business model? And then on top of that, is there a Web3 nativeness to it where it's not something that really feels sort of like a Web2 model as far as how it interacts with its community or its users, but rather is thinking about building in a Web3 native way? And then finally, there's the way that that information is brought forward. And so, especially because most of us are working, combination of sync and async, communication is so incredibly important. And so there's the classic call to adventure that you hear about so much at Seed Club. Are they able to succinctly, compellingly call people to adventure, tell people this is where we're going, this is why this is important, and this is who should join us on this adventure? And then basically throughout the application, are they able to explain what it is that they're building, and are they able to do that in a clear and compelling way? Again, what you'll see in the application is that we're bringing a lot more of this to the surface. And so we hope that these are the same elements that people will take into consideration as they're reviewing projects.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other dynamics that will emerge and sort of will naturally be included in the selection process to a degree, which is how are teams engaging with the comments and the discussion that are happening around their projects. I think you can learn a lot by that sort of live discussion. and there's a couple other pieces that sort of stand out to me as well. One, I think, we don't sort of state the necessity out of this. Doing something in Web3, especially if you're doing it with community, is much easier if you're doing it with others. And so just looking back on many of the projects we backed in the past, some of the most successful ones, the ones that are able to make the most progress, definitely not universally, but I think in a general sense, are folks who have 2 or 3 people on their team, not just a solo founder who's stepping into the space. Now, obviously, there are a number of teams that have been led by one person or doing exceptional work in the space, but I think having somebody else to bounce the hard discussions off of and get clear with is huge. So if people are considering whether they should apply with just themselves or if it would be better to have a co-founder, I think my answer would almost always be have a co-founder. Since so much of what we're focused on is communities, that's maybe an obvious thing to say, but I think coming into the accelerator, engaging in the programming as a pair, I think has been seen as being very beneficial. I think that the last really big one for me is you kind of hinted at it with is this Web3? We believe that tokens give community superpowers to distribute ownership and governance and value to the members of these communities who are creating value. We're really interested in projects that are building Web3 native in that way, where the goal is not to create something, bring a community together and, extract value from that community. That's what we would consider Web2, but rather to ensure that the people who are creating value within these communities and networks are getting to capture some of that value themselves. And so we are big fans of ownership structures and project structures that are really focusing on that. Now, how you get there is a big open question. So it's not a comment on us preferring certain structures or legal structures or organizational structures. I think there's many paths to it, but the intention of the project really needs to be leaning into this idea that networks are valuable because of the people who are in them creating value, and that the best way to really unlock that value and align that value is through distributing that value and ownership and membership and governance to the participants there. So for me personally, that is one of the most important things when I talk to projects through the accelerator or even before, is how are we really leaning into this idea of folks being members, owners, governors, participants, and seeing the value of their effort accrue as they create more value together.
It's a great call, Jess. And I think one of the interesting transitions that I have seen in this cycle, and certainly was seeing hints of in the last, is that not surprisingly, we have more people that are interested in building in Web3 because it's exploded. I mean, you sort of couldn't turn anywhere last year without some sort of article about what is Web3 and, what are NFTs. And this is a space that if you are interested in tech and innovation, you might decide that you want to come build in it. And so we're seeing this proliferation of DAO tools and sort of taking these Web2 models and thinking that the same cookie cutter that worked really well in Web 2 can be brought into Web 3 and just substitute email address for wallet address, and that you'll have a concept that works really well. And there's a lot of elements, in that equation that are problematic. But one of the pieces that's perhaps less visible is what you just named. And so understanding what sort of a successful end game looks like in a Web3 community is very different than when projects we're building in Web 2. And so there's so many elements of what Web3 native is and looks like. And it's not just how you're building your tool, but also just how you're actually thinking about the structure of this organization that you're building, and who has decision-making power, and what are the various utilities of this token that you're putting out into the world, and what relationships you're building with these token holders. Unless projects are really thoughtfully thinking about that, especially the ones that are coming in saying, it looks like there's a need for a tool that does X or Y, I think that that's something that can be really hard to understand if this is your first time trying to build a tool in Web3 and you haven't necessarily had the time to experience what that actually feels like to be in one of those communities.
Yeah, and I think the how to do that is the thing that we're very well positioned to support teams on, but the why underneath it is the thing that we need teams to be aligned on. I think I always describe this
Yeah.
when I'm talking to teams, and I will often ask the question of like, what does an exit look like for you? And if they say acquisition or IPO, that's probably not a good fit for C Club. But words like exit to
Yeah.
community are really good fits for C Club. And yeah, it's a broad design space, but to me, that's what it means to build in Web3. So tokens, digital assets give sort of new property rights, new tools that we can use to recognize value in these networks. And to me, that is like the step change that exists now because of crypto, among many others. And we want teams who are going to be experimenting in that design space. And there's just so much to figure out and so many new ways to be able to go about doing things. But the intention really needs to be around distributing that value and ownership and governance and all the various pieces to the people who are making up that network. Otherwise, you should probably just go start a company. And there are many really great accelerators out there who can support you in that far better than we can.
1000%. Yeah. And there's, and there's tools that are going to come into Web3 and solve different problems that are not necessarily going to be thinking about exiting to community. And that's also okay. But the ones that we're building with, this is a specific philosophy and an ecosystem that we're building in. Yeah, that's what we're looking for.
I mean, it's led us to say no to some potentially very big financial opportunities, but I think it's really important to sort of put the stake in the ground of what we believe in. And I mean, we're very lucky that so many others see that vision as well. We're definitely not the only carriers of that flag. There's an incredible group of human beings in the C Club ecosystem already and beyond that see this as so novel, new, and interesting and worthwhile exploring, even if it's more difficult and more uncertain. But that this difference of ensuring that people get to capture the value they create on the internet, not the platforms themselves, is, I think, a very big, important thing and very worthwhile investing our heartbeats in. Nicole, I am so hot in this room right now. The sun is beating in. I am like literally stuck to my chair. There's no airflow here because they're doing construction outside right now. And I just couldn't bear to make folks listen
I'm
to this or listening to the construction.
literally hot
There's the
boxing.
AC/DC blaring on the radio in the construction site next door to my house right now, disrupting my wilderness peace.
That's good.
But I think we've sort of covered a lot of ground here. I think the exciting part is there's no shortage of touch points folks can have with us over the next few weeks to answer any specific questions. Our team's available to talk through that with interested parties who may be sitting on the fence of whether they should apply to C Club or not. Would probably recommend people just apply because they're going to get, at the very least, a ton of interesting insight and comments. I know I've been warming up my fingers all year for this to be able to jump into that comment section. But I'm thinking just, applications have opened. Are there a couple important dates that we just want to make sure people are aware of? Like, when do they need to have their applications in by? When are they going to know? And when does the accelerator actually kick off?
So if you are interested in our accelerator, then I assume that you've been following along at least a little bit. And if that's the case, then you should know August 15th is the deadline to apply. We are not accepting applications after August 15th, even if you send me very heartfelt emails and messages. So August 15th is the deadline to apply. You can start your application and edit it throughout. You can submit and then continue editing through August 15th. But at August 15th, you need to have submitted your application and you cannot edit it after that date. The next important deadline is August 22nd. Once all of those projects have set their applications in stone and hit submit, our club holding community will have a week until August 22nd to boost and comment on projects. Builders can still respond to the comments and questions. They cannot edit their application, and that will happen for a week. We're going to have a week to let people review projects. After that, we're going to go into those cycles that you mentioned, Jess, where we're scoring, we're interviewing, we're doing diligence, we're deliberating, we're looking at, is there alignment? Is this something that is a good fit for Seed Club? And so we're going to go through those cycles. And that takes time. That's definitely the most challenging part of this process. And so our aim is to have that done by September 12th with notifications out to projects following that. And then the accelerator starts September 26th. So it's going to be an exciting 2 months, and projects will be notified along the way. So you will know if you've gone on to the next cycle or not. I know that it's really hard to wait, and that's a really long timetable. Doing things in community is great, but it's often not fast. And so we recognize that, and we're going to be communicating along the way.
So for folks listening to this, if you are thinking about applying, get those applications in right now. I expect there to be a lot of value in getting feedback and being able to sort of update and sharpen your application through that feedback. So I'd recommend you get it in as soon as you can, even if it's not perfect. We always see such a huge wave of applicants right towards the end of the deadline. Don't be that person. Take as much advantage of the community support that we can give you through applying early. It's been so long since we've been in the midst of what is my favorite part, which is supporting these projects at the earliest stages. And I cannot wait to see how this application process goes, to dive into the scores of projects that we'll be applying. It's just probably the most optimistic time and experience. There's just so many amazing people building things. We're not going to be able to work with everybody, but I'm very excited that we have said no to some projects before that have gone on to do some really incredible things. Would prefer that we don't miss great projects, but even if you're not chosen, we're so excited about the work and the possibility of your project. So, and of course, projects who don't get chosen, I think we've seen a couple reapplicants, and Seed Club as well is a very supportive network that, ultimately we want to see people win and these types of organizations thrive on the internet. And so very stoked to support projects even outside the accelerator as we're able to. It is Friday evening, late Friday evening, the weekend before applications open. Nicole, you and the team at Seed Club have done an incredible job of wrangling so many different possibilities into.
Shout out to the team.
Well, yes.
Massive
shout out and also pre-shout out for all the work that will be done in the coming months. And then, of course, as we jump into the accelerator as well. So, yeah, I look forward to probably another catch-up podcast just before we launch the accelerator so we can give people a heads up on what's happening and the latest and greatest. Of course, if folks can follow along, if you're not in our Discord, hop into the Discord. You can find that link on our Twitter profile, and we're always available there for questions or comments or to help you along your way.
We can't wait to meet you. We're super excited.